My store manager closed the office, the click of the lock echoing in the cavernous silence of the furniture showroom. He turned, the key dangling from his index finger, a small silver glint in the dim emergency lighting. "We're done," Julian said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate right through the polished concrete floor. He took a step closer, the corner of his mouth ticking up in that way that always made my stomach do a slow, lazy flip. Almost. For the last 5 days, we had been drowning in inventory. Boxes, packing peanuts, the incessant beep of the scanner gun, and the dry, papery scent of cardboard had become my entire world. It was just the two of us, Julian and me, tackling the annual count for our boutique furniture store. Hearth and home, everyone else had been sent home hours ago, their relieved chatter fading into the city's evening hum, leaving behind a profound quiet that felt both intimate and unnerving. Now, in that quiet, his word hung in the air. Almost. I had worked for Julian for 3 years. In that time, I had cataloged every version of his smiles, from the tight, professional one he gave demanding clients to the rare, genuine one that crinkled the corners of his deep-set eyes. I knew the scent of his cologne, a subtle mix of sandalwood and something sharp, like gin, that clung to the air in his office. I knew he took his coffee black, that he tapped his pen against his teeth when he was thinking, and that the left sleeve of his crisp white shirts was always rolled just a little higher than the right. I knew all these useless, intimate details because I had been quietly, hopelessly in love with him since my first day. He was my boss. He was confident, decisive, and moved through the world with an ease I could only dream of. I was not. I was quiet. I was observant, and I was cripplingly good at blending into the background, another neutral-toned fixture in a store full of them. We had a good working relationship, easy and professional. I was his reliable second-in-command. But that was all. It had to be. Almost. I managed, my voice sounding thin. Julian's smile widened. He tossed the key onto his desk, the sound loud in the stillness. Mandatory debriefing. We survived another year. That deserves a drink. He walked past me, his shoulder brushing mine. The contact was brief, accidental, but it sent a jolt straight down my spine. I stood frozen, watching him disappear into the main showroom, the space a labyrinth of shadows and monolithic shapes that were sofas and armchairs by day. My heart is a frantic bird beating against my ribs. This is what he does. He creates these little moments, these ambiguous spaces where my hope can run wild before being neatly corralled back into the pen of professionalism. A lingering look over the sales reports. A hand on my back to guide me through a crowded aisle. A shared laugh that felt, for a second, like it belonged to two friends, not a manager and his subordinate. I always told myself I was imagining it, reading too much into it, because the alternative was too terrifying to consider. I followed him, my shoes making soft, squeaking sounds on the floor. He had switched on a single, low-wattage lamp in the living section, casting a warm, golden glow over a plush velvet sofa and a dark oak coffee table. It looked less like a store and more like someone's home. Our home. The thought came out of nowhere, sharp and painful. On the coffee table, he'd already placed a bottle of amber liquid and 2 heavy crystal glasses. I recognized the bottle. It was a ridiculously expensive single malt whiskey he kept locked in his bottom drawer for closing impossible deals. "Take a seat, Leo," he said, his back to me as he uncorked the bottle. The soft pop echoed in the room. "You've earned it." I sat on the edge of the emerald green sofa, feeling like an actor on a set. The velvet was cool beneath my hand. I watched him pour, the steady, practiced movement of his hands. He was wearing one of his usual fitted gray shirts, the sleeves now rolled to his elbows, revealing strong forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. The fabric stretched across his shoulders as he leaned forward. I had spent countless hours watching him, memorizing the cartography of his body, the way he stood, the way he moved. It was a quiet, private torture. He turned and handed me a glass, his fingers brushing mine. This time, the touch lingered. A deliberate, feather-light pressure that made the breath catch in my throat. His eyes met mine over the rim of the glass, and for the first time, there was nothing professional in his gaze. It was dark, searching, and utterly unreadable. My mind raced, trying to find the script for this scene. There wasn't one. "To inventory," he said, his voice a low murmur. He clinked his glass against mine. The undisputed worst part of the job. To inventory, I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. I took a sip. The whiskey was smoky and smooth, burning a slow, welcome path down my chest, steadying my frayed nerves. We drank in silence for a moment. The only sounds the distant wail of a siren and the soft hum of the store's climate control. The quiet wasn't empty. It was full of everything we weren't saying. I am a spectator in my own life. I watch things happen from a safe distance, cataloging emotions and experiences without ever truly participating. But sitting here, with Julian so close I could feel the warmth radiating from his body, the distance was gone. I was in the scene. The lights were on me, and I had no idea what my lines were. So, he started, leaning back into the cushions of the matching armchair, looking completely at ease. How are you, Leo? Really? The question threw me. It wasn't small talk. The addition of that last word, really, freighted it with a weight I didn't know how to handle. I'm good. Tired, I said, defaulting to the simple truth. It was a long week. It was, he agreed, swirling the whiskey in his glass. The amber liquid caught the light. But we make a good team, don't we? Yeah, we do. The words came out more heartfelt than I intended. He smiled that slow, deliberate smile again. I think so too. He took another drink, his eyes never leaving mine. It was an unnerving amount of attention. I was used to being overlooked, to being a reliable piece of the store's architecture. To be seen like this, so directly, felt like standing in a spotlight, naked. I wanted to squirm, to look away, to retreat into my comfortable shell. But I couldn't. His gaze held me captive. You're quiet, Leo, he observed, his tone gentle. I'm never quite sure what you're thinking. My internal monologue screamed. If you knew what I was thinking, you'd fire me. Or run. Probably both. Out loud, I said, not much to think about. Just counting boxes. It was a weak deflection, and we both knew it. He chuckled, a low, pleasant sound. I don't believe that for a second. He leaned forward, setting his glass on the table with a soft clink. He rested his elbows on his knees, his posture suddenly focused, intense. I see the way you look at the designs. The way you talk to customers about the pieces. You don't just sell furniture. You feel it. You understand the stories they tell. My face grew hot. He saw that. He paid that much attention. I like the work. I know you do. He paused, and the silence stretched, pulling taut between us. That's not what I'm talking about. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was he talking about? What was happening here? Was I misreading everything? Was this just some bizarre performance review? My anxiety began to spiral, a familiar, sickening descent. I was an idiot. A fool for letting my stupid crush color this entire interaction. This was my boss, and I was about to make a complete fool of myself. I need to leave. I need to make an excuse. My cat, my apartment, a sudden, debilitating headache. Anything. As if sensing my panic, Julian's expression softened. Hey, he said, his voice dropping even lower, becoming soothing. Relax. It's just us. Just us. The words hung there, simple and devastatingly potent. In this vast, empty store, it was just the two of us, existing in a pocket of time that felt separate from the real world. My panic subsided, replaced by a wave of desperate yearning. I wanted to stay in this bubble with him forever. He stood up and walked over to a ridiculously overpriced, minimalist floor lamp and switched it off, plunging our little island into an even deeper, more intimate gloom. Now, the only light was the warm glow from the single lamp behind his chair, which threw his face into a landscape of sharp angles and soft shadows. He moved with a predatory grace that was utterly mesmerizing. He didn't sit back down. Instead, he came to the sofa. He didn't sit next to me, but perched on the coffee table, facing me. Our knees were inches apart. The air crackled. I could smell the whiskey on his breath, mixed with that sandalwood cologne. It was intoxicating. This setup is all wrong, he said, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. He gestured vaguely at the space around us. Wrong? I asked, my voice hoarse. Yeah, the balance is off. That side table, it's too heavy for the armchair. He was looking at a small, walnut end table a few feet away, but I knew, with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty, that he wasn't talking about furniture anymore. What would you do? I asked, playing along, my body thrumming with a nervous energy that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. I'd move it, he said simply. His eyes flicked from the table back to my face. Create a bit more space. Or maybe get rid of it altogether. Bring things closer. My breath hitched. Bring things closer. The subtext was a siren's call, loud and clear. He was giving me a choice. I could shut this down, make a joke, pretend I didn't understand the game he was playing. Or I could play along. For the first time in my life, I didn't want to retreat. I wanted to be brave. Show me, I whispered. A slow, triumphant smile spread across Julian's face. It was the smile I'd seen him use when he closed a six-figure deal, but this time it was aimed at me, and it felt like a victory I hadn't even known I was fighting for. He stood up, and for a wild second, I thought he was actually going to move the furniture. Instead, he held out a hand to me. Come on, he said. Let's fix it. My hand trembled as I placed it in his. His grip was firm, his palm warm and slightly calloused. He pulled me to my feet, and he didn't let go. He drew me closer, until there was barely a foot of space between us. I had to tilt my head back to look at him. His eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw a reflection of my own yearning, my own fear. He wasn't just playing a game. He was as lost in this as I was. The problem, he murmured, his voice thick, is that we spend all day surrounded by things that are meant to create intimacy. A perfectly placed sofa, a cozy reading nook, a dining table for 2 inches. Thumb began to stroke the back of my hand, a small, repetitive motion that sent shivers up my arm. We sell the idea of home, of connection, and we do it from a distance. I couldn't speak. My throat was tight, my mind a blank slate wiped clean by the overwhelming proximity of him. All my carefully constructed walls, all my professional boundaries, were crumbling to dust. I'm tired of the distance, Leo, he confessed, his voice barely audible. He let go of my hand, and my heart plummeted. But then his hands came up to cup my face, his palms warm against my skin. His thumbs brushed gently over my cheekbones. It was the softest, most deliberate touch I had ever felt. It was a question, an apology, and a promise all at once. This is real. This is happening. The thought echoed in the stunned silence of my mind. He leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. I leaned in, meeting him halfway, closing the last inch of that torturous distance that had separated us for 3 long years. His lips were softer than I had imagined, and they tasted of whiskey and a desperate, long-held patience. The kiss wasn't hungry or demanding. It was a quiet discovery. It was a sigh of relief. It was the feeling of a lock finally clicking into place. All the unspoken words, all the stolen glances, all the carefully maintained professionalism, it all melted away in that one, perfect, honest moment. My hands, acting of their own accord, came up to rest on his waist, gripping the fabric of his shirt. I felt the hard muscle beneath, and it grounded me. This was Julian, and he was kissing me. In the middle of the showroom floor, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 imaginary lives, we were starting our own. He pulled back slightly, just enough to rest his forehead against mine. His eyes were closed. I could feel his breath, warm and steady, on my lips. Okay, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. I let out a shaky breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Yeah, I breathed. Okay. It was the most inadequate word in the world for the explosion of feeling inside me, but it was all I had. He opened his eyes, and the familiar mischievous glint was there, but it was softer now, tempered with a vulnerability that made my chest ache. Good, he said. Because I've been wanting to do that since the day you walked into your interview and told me you thought our mid-century collection was derivative but well executed. A laugh bubbled up out of me, real and unrestrained. I can't believe you remember that. I remember everything, he said, his expression turning serious again. This wasn't about inventory, Leo. None of this. He gestured to the whiskey, the quiet showroom. I couldn't go another day pretending I didn't see you. Pretending I didn't see you. The words hit me harder than the kiss. All this time, I'd thought I was invisible, just another part of the scenery. But he had seen me, the real me, the one who overthought everything, who loved the grain of a good piece of wood, who was desperately lonely. The silence of the store, which had felt so intimidating before, now felt like a sanctuary, a bubble protecting us from the outside world. But bubbles, by their very nature, are fragile. The real world was waiting just outside the glass doors. The world where he was my boss and I was his employee. The world of complications and consequences. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the warm haze of the moment. What now? What did this mean? Was this a one-time, whiskey-fueled mistake? My hands on his waist tensed. I felt myself starting to pull back, to retreat to the safety of my own head. Julian must have felt the shift. His hands tightened on my face, holding me steady. "Hey," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "Look at me." I forced my eyes to meet his. "This wasn't a mistake," he said, as if reading my mind. "And this isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning." The certainty in his voice was an anchor in my sea of anxiety. He wasn't scared. He was calm, resolute. He was the confident, decisive man I had admired from afar, and he was focusing all of that strength on me, on us. "Okay," I said again, the word feeling a little more solid this time. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of him, letting it fill me up. "Okay," he smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and I felt my own lips curve in response. He leaned in and kissed me again, and this time there was no hesitation, no discovery. It was a kiss of confirmation. It was warm and sure and tasted like a new beginning. When we finally broke apart, the reality of our surroundings began to seep back in. We were standing in the middle of our workplace after hours. We had glasses of expensive whiskey sitting on a display table. We had just fundamentally altered our entire professional relationship. An awkward energy started to creep into the space between us. The morning after had arrived, not with the sun, but with the hum of the fluorescent emergency lights. I suddenly felt self-conscious, hyper-aware of my wrinkled shirt and the fact that I probably smelled like cardboard and sweat. I dropped my hands from his waist and took a small step back, creating a space that felt both necessary and wrong. I couldn't meet his eyes. What have I done? The panic was a cold wash over my skin. This was insane. I could lose my job. Worse, I could lose this whatever this was. The potential for humiliation was astronomical. My brain, my oldest and most persistent enemy, started supplying a highlight reel of every possible worst-case scenario. "Leo," Julian's voice was quiet, cutting through the noise in my head. I risked a glance at him. He wasn't smiling anymore. He was watching me with an intense, concerned expression. He didn't try to touch me again. He just waited. He gave me the space I had just created, respecting the silent boundary I'd drawn. The gesture was more reassuring than any words could have been. He wasn't pushing. He wasn't taking my panic as rejection. He was simply giving me a moment to breathe. "I'm sorry," I mumbled, looking at the floor. "This is just a lot." "I know," he said. His voice was still calm, a steady presence. "I know it is. I probably shouldn't have done that." "Here." "No," I said quickly, looking up at him again. The thought of him regretting it was unbearable. "No, I'm glad you did. I'm not good at this." "At what?" he asked gently. "This," I said, gesturing vaguely between us. "Navigating feelings. Especially when they're here." I motioned to the store around us. "With my boss." A small, wry smile touched his lips. "I'm not your boss right now, Leo," he said. "Right now, I'm just Julian. And you're just Leo. Everything else, we can figure that out tomorrow. Or the day after. We have time. We have time." The phrase settled in my chest, warm and heavy. It was a promise. This wasn't a fleeting moment to be forgotten by morning. It was something that would exist in the daylight. The test was coming. The test was what happened when we walked out that door. Could this feeling survive the harsh light of the parking lot? The mundane reality of our separate cars and separate lives? Julian seemed to understand. He took a step back, breaking the intensity of the moment, and began gathering our glasses. The simple, domestic action was oddly comforting. He was right. One step at a time. "Let's get out of here," he said, his back to me as he put the cap back on the whiskey bottle. "I think we've debriefed enough for one night." I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I felt a strange mix of relief and disappointment. I wanted to leave the pressure of this room, but I didn't want the night to end. I didn't want to go back to my empty apartment, where I would inevitably lie awake and dissect every second of this encounter until I had convinced myself it was a dream. He turned, the bottle and glasses in his hands, and started walking back toward his office. I followed, our footsteps echoing in sync. He put everything away, locked his desk drawer, and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. The routine actions felt surreal after what had just happened. It was like watching a film run in reverse, putting everything back where it belonged. We stood by the back exit, the metal door a stark barrier between our bubble and the real world. The moment of truth. He would go to his car, I would go to mine, and we would see each other tomorrow morning under the bright, unforgiving lights of the store, and we would have to pretend. My heart sank. Julian turned the deadbolt, the sound a final, heavy thud. He paused with his hand on the push bar, but he didn't open the door. He turned to face me. "So," he said, his tone carefully casual. "What are you doing now?" "Going home," I said, my own voice flat with a disappointment I couldn't hide. "Right?" He nodded, looking down for a second. He looked nervous. Julian, the unshakable, was nervous. The realization sent a fresh jolt of hope through me. He was just as scared of this ending as I was. He looked up, and his eyes were clear and direct. He was making a choice. "My place," he said. It wasn't a question. It was an offer. A statement. "For breakfast. It's a terrible diner down the street that has surprisingly good coffee. Or we could just order in. Or we could just skip to that part." The air left my lungs in a rush. It was a clear, unambiguous invitation. A bridge from the fantasy of the closed store to the reality of the outside world. He was giving us a tomorrow. A wide, incredulous smile broke across my face. I couldn't stop it. "I like coffee," I said, my voice filled with a lightness I hadn't felt in years. The relief that washed over his face was profound. The tension left his shoulders, and he returned my smile with one of his own, full of warmth and genuine happiness. "Coffee it is," he said. He pushed the door open, and the cool night air rushed in, smelling of rain and asphalt. It didn't break the spell. It felt like a fresh start. We stepped out into the dimly lit alley behind the store. The world was quiet, asleep. We walked side by side toward the employee parking lot. The silence between us was different now. It was comfortable, filled with a quiet anticipation. As we reached my beat-up sedan, I fumbled for my keys, my fingers suddenly clumsy. "Follow me," he said, his voice soft beside me. I looked up and found him watching me, his expression unreadable in the gloom. And then he did something that made my heart stop and then restart in a frantic, joyful rhythm. He reached out and took my hand. He didn't just grab it. He carefully, deliberately laced his fingers through mine. His palm was warm and rough against my own. It was a simple gesture, so small, but in the context of my life, of my years of silent longing and careful observation, it was monumental. It was a public declaration in a private space. It was an anchor. It was everything. I looked down at our joined hands, then back up at his face. The man I had loved from a distance was standing right here, holding my hand, waiting to lead me into a future I had never been brave enough to imagine. I was no longer an observer. I was here. I could feel the rough texture of his skin, the cool metal of my keys pressed into my other palm, the damp night air on my face. The world, which had so often felt like a series of images viewed through a pane of glass, was suddenly, vividly real. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't overthinking. For the first time, my mind was quiet. I squeezed his hand. "Okay," I said. And as I followed the red taillights of his car out of the parking lot and into the sleeping city, I felt it. A feeling I hadn't realized I was missing until this very moment. It wasn't the wild, chaotic feeling I'd read about in books. It was quiet. It was steady. It felt, impossibly, like I was finally coming home.